What happens when passion meets purpose? Welcome to Life Expressions. I'm your host, Charie Ginete-Ilon. Today we sit down with Burnaby Councillor Maita Santiago, a trailblazing leader, advocate, and community champion. From her journey as an immigrant to shaping policies in Canada, specifically in Burnaby, that uplift lives, Maita shares her insights on leadership, resilience, and creating lasting impact. So tune in as we dive into her inspiring story, because when passion meets purpose, real change happens. Welcome to Life Expressions, Maita.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Of course, it is my pleasure. Please share with us your journey from the Philippines to Canada.
Sure. So I was born in the Philippines. My parents are from Bulacan, but when we left, we lived in Pasig. And we immigrated to Canada as a family. We were sponsored by my mom's brother. This was in the late 70s. So I basically grew up here, grade school, high school, university. Yeah, that's how I've come to be here.
Yeah, and so what inspired you to enter politics and public service?
Yeah, gosh. I was reflecting on this, and I think sometimes I think that I think back to my parents, right? And how sometimes we don't realize it, but the stories they tell us or don't tell us really makes a difference. So we grew up here, and it was only my mom's brother that was here at the time. We didn't have much, right? We're a family of four, and for many years in the early days, we had a one-bedroom apartment. But what we did have a lot of was my mom's stories. So she would always tell us about her dad, who was a longtime mayor of her hometown. So just lots and lots of stories about how, what he would do in the community. People would come to the house. And, of course, growing up, I didn't think much of it. And then my dad, he was also, for a time, a city councillor in Pasig. And again, I didn't think much of it growing up. But now looking back, I think, maybe that sort of forms like a backdrop, right? When you think as a child about, what could be possible. And then I think another thing is, so I've always been interested in public service, and there was just an opportunity to run for city council. Actually, the first time was in 1993 when I was still a student at SFU. I was studying political science, didn't know much, but what I did know was how important it was for government, for elected officials to represent the communities that they serve. So at the time, there was an opportunity, we need more young people on council. We need maybe someone from the immigrant community, Filipino community. So that was my first run.
Yeah,
Of course,
and so
I didn't win.
Yeah.
I didn't win. Went back to SFU, finished my degree, and thought, you know what, I'm not going to run again, because I think I met some people organizing Filipino caregivers and Filipino youth around issues of identity and racism. And, Charie, I think that's really where I would say I became passionate about trying to be part of something that changed systems and, that changed things for the long term. I think community organizing is really the way to go. So I did that for a long time. And then until most recently, a couple of years ago, there was another opportunity to run for city council, this time in Burnaby. And by that time, I lived in Burnaby for, over 10 years, loved it here. My kids were born here, liked how the city was run, and I wanted to be part of keeping that going. And that's why I ran.
How many years have you been in public service now?
So this is my first term. So it's just been over 2 years. And I'm with the Burnaby Citizens Association. So that's the local political party here. And as I mentioned, they've had a real big role in shaping Burnaby. And so I've been really, it's been a great experience so far.
That's great. Yeah. But looking back, when you were young and you first immigrated, could you recall the challenges that you faced as an immigrant, especially the ones that have been shared by your parents with you, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe, see, here's one story that I don't remember, but my mom tells me and my sister. She says, so when I moved here, I was 6, my sister was 5. So we went to Mount Pleasant Elementary School in East Vancouver. And my mom says for the first few weeks, we would come home at lunchtime and on our own. And she said we would come home because we were scared of English. So, of course, I don't remember that part, but, that's why my mom, said. And so she would take us back, to the school. But those early days, yeah, I don't know. I think another thing I do remember, Charie, growing up, was how all I really wanted, and this stuck with me up until, maybe early days of university. All I really wanted was to fit in, right? So if you can imagine Metro Vancouver in the late 70s, even 90s when I was in high school, there weren't too many Filipinos. So oftentimes, people think, maybe I'm Chinese or, some other thing. But inside, I felt Canadian, and all I wanted was to fit in and for people to think of as Canadian. And I remember just sort of pushing back on that Filipino side. One time in grade 7, I remember I had hopia for lunch, right? And a classmate, I was like, ooh, what's that, right? And my first reaction was to say, oh, it's something my mom made. It's just something she did, right?
Yeah.
I remember, just being embarrassed. And I grew up my parents were from Bulacan, so they spoke Tagalog. So they would speak Tagalog to us sometimes, but we always answered in English. So we never spoke Tagalog growing up, English. And, but then what happened was in university, I think that's when I started to think, oh, wait a minute. I'm, of course, not, I don't present as, someone like a European, Caucasian Canadian, like I'm, because I would feel different, right? Because I'd only pancit to you.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a disconnect. And I do remember, Charie, in university, I'm like, okay, well, I don't quite fit in as a Canadian. I'm like, oh, we're going to the Philippines. I remember it was one of my first trips back, right? As, since I was like 9 years old, I think was the last trip. And I remember looking forward to it and thinking, oh, this is great. I'm like Filipino. I'll be like, this is where my people are. And I remember getting there and people telling me, well, you're not actually Filipino, right? And then that was when I was like, well, I'm not quite Filipino. I'm not quite Canadian. So then at the time we called it like this, I don't know if there's another term, but at the time we would call it an identity crisis. Because you're not quite sure where you fit in.
Yes.
So towards the end of university, when I met some other people like me who grew up here, who were organizing around issues of identity, that's when I was like, I really embraced it and thought, wow, this all makes, I felt like I had, I was with people who understood like where I was coming from. And then that's when I started to learn more about the Filipino part. And I guess that's in terms of like the initial question, how you overcame the challenges. That's when I really put a lot of effort in learning about Filipino history, the conditions in the Philippines, learning about Filipino caregivers, because at the time, that's when a lot of people in our community were coming in, as caregivers. And I found that really helped me in terms of understanding my own identity as a Filipino person in Canada.
Yes. Because when you were very young, perhaps you were embarrassed that you were different than the Canadians, but you are now proud of being a Filipino-Canadian. You were born in the Philippines, raised in Canada, and your culture is kind of mixed. Could you say that? Like Filipino-Canadian culture?
Yeah. I think that's exactly right. I have a friend who was very active in the, not just the Filipino community, but, just in community in general.
Yes.
What did he call it? So his name is Alden Habucon. So he passed away recently, but he was a real leader and one of the things that he talked about was cultural navigators. And so, when I heard that also resonated with me because it was like, because we're navigating, right? Like different cultures, like the Filipino culture and the Canadian culture. And that makes sense. Because yes, now I'm at this point in my life where I'm, incredibly proud to be Filipino. And I, let people know as often as I can that that's where I'm from. I'm from the Philippines. I was born there. And I found, Charie, like in my life and my work, it's really something that's given me meaning. And it's something that's been, it's a real, what would you call it? Like asset, I think, right? That I have. I tell kids, because now I'm involved with a group that's trying to put on more Filipino language story times at the library, Filipino language classes. And I tell kids, I feel like I have this superpower, for example, knowing how to speak Filipino, right? Because you're able to, access this whole different world and relate to people in a different way.
Yeah. You said that it's like your superpower and now it is an asset. But how does your Filipino heritage shape your perspective as a councillor in Burnaby?
I think, Charie, Burnaby, it's also a very special city. I think Right. I'm incredibly biased, but I also think it's...
I'm proud to live in Burnaby.
Yes, very, very proud. Burnaby is one of the what we call hyper-diverse cities. People in Burnaby, I think, speak more than 200 different languages. Maybe 6 out of 10 of us are immigrants born, somewhere else. A lot of us, just come from all across the world, right? And so I think, as an immigrant myself, it's an asset because, I feel like I have, I bring a lens to what we need, hopefully, to be doing as a city to try to make it more inclusive and welcoming of people from, all parts of the globe so that, regardless of where you're from, everybody feels safe and they feel like they're a part of Burnaby. And I find that it helps, inform how I look at the different policies. Like, for example, whenever we have, I don't know, maybe we've got like a new food sustainability strategy, for example, right? We want to communicate it out to people. So I'm always mindful, okay, well, how are we doing that? Are we doing it in different languages? Are we tapping into informal networks, right, that these communities have? So just things like that.
That's great. Maita, you're also the chair of the Access Advisory Committee. What does this mean and what impact are you making?
Yeah, so the Access Advisory Committee, it's actually a committee that we've had since the 80s in Burnaby, but since a few years ago, because of provincial legislation, right, in the Accessibility Act. So it's now a regular advisory committee at the city. And basically it's the committee that's responsible for advising council on how we can make Burnaby more inclusive and more welcoming to people who might be living, with different challenges, right, or barriers. So everything from sight to mobility to, if they have if they're neurodivergent, so things like that. So right now, Burnaby, we're working on an accessibility plan. So our committee is, tasked with reviewing that. We helped formulate it. And now, we'll be reviewing it and, trying to make sure that it's really one that will meet the needs of our residents. We're also just launched recently an accessibility feedback form. So this is a tool that we're going to be using in the city to get input from residents from when they see different barriers across the city. It's a way for them to let us know what they are so that we can take action on them.
That's wonderful. Are there any memorable moments for you or any success stories that have reaffirmed your purpose and your passion as a leader?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, Charie, I view in general my role. So I'm in city council, but I view in general my role as an elected official is really one to support and amplify whatever it is that, the community's needs are. Right. So if there's campaigns or issues people are passionate about. So I see my role as, being there to hopefully support that and amplify it. And that if we're able to take action on it, like at city council, to be able to try to do that. So maybe just two things that have happened is one, we had a delegation come to our social planning committee. They have a program called City Shift. And so a delegation came and they presented on what they thought was a way for cities to make their policies more inclusive, right? And more mindful about the needs of different underrepresented groups in our city. So they talked about this thing called GBA+, Gender-Based Plus Analysis tool. Okay. So it's a tool that cities can use to see, okay, is this policy, making sure that it meets the needs of women, that it meets the needs of immigrants, right, and other communities. And so we heard it at Social Planning Committee, and I remember thinking, this is a fantastic idea. It's something that we should use at the city. So I was, grateful because, I was able to have an opportunity, at that meeting to forward a motion for staff to look at incorporating that. And that eventually was passed. So now, for example, chairing our planning department, we use this GBA Plus tool.
Yes.
To inform our official community plan review and, and our other community plan reviews, right? So I thought that was, one very concrete example of how a group came to us about something they were passionate about. And then as elected officials, we were able to say, yes, we should do this. And so now it's part of our policy. Maybe
That's
one
wonderful.
other quick example, Charie, this is it's a very specific story.
Yes.
that I'm
I love
also
that.
happy about. So about last year, maybe we had some parents at a local elementary school reach out. They're like, okay, there's a problem at our elementary school because there are no sidewalks nearby. And so this is very dangerous for the kids, for families. We need sidewalks. So they invited myself, mayor, councillors. We came with some staff. They showed it to us. And we're like, yes, this is dangerous. We should do something about it. So fast forward over many months, we had staff looked at it. We looked at our budget. And, I'm pleased to say that because of the advocacy of these parents, we were able to fast forward the construction of new sidewalks around this
That's
school.
great.
Yeah, so it's very specific to a community, but
Kudos
again,
to you. Yeah.
yeah, but it's an example of, I think that sort of fits in with my vision of how really as elected officials, as a city council, we're there to, implement policies and make sure things are moving in a direction that benefits
Yeah.
most residents. And I think first step towards that is hearing from folks and, from folks about what they need, right?
Yes.
And I think it's fantastic when groups of folks are able to organize together, because and amplify what they need to us, because that's really, I think, makes a big difference. And in general, I think it's how, as a whole, as a society, it's how we're able to make sure that that we're moving in a just direction.
That is great because you really listen and you embrace and you empathize with their needs and you get to be their voice and implement what you need to implement in the name of public service, right? Yeah. And speaking of issues, like no Canadian will not mention or talk about the U.S. tariffs that's now being implemented on Canada. So with this 25% or even higher tariffs on Canada implemented by the U.S. Trump administration, how do you think this might impact Burnaby and its businesses and the residents?
Yeah, I know, Charie, we're all very worried as well, about these incredibly uncertain times ahead. I know as City Council, we took action right away. When the tariffs were first announced, through Mayor Mike Hurley, we supported his motion, for example, for as a city, that we look at our procurement policies to make sure that we're supporting Canadian businesses. So that was the first thing that we did, and so now we have even as a city, we have a policy where we're going to be prioritizing, right? Canadian businesses, Canadian vendors, and we're also asking that those contractors, right, when they source materials or, when they do their work to meet our contracts, that they also source Canadian, that they buy Canadian, right?
Support
Yeah,
Canadian.
and happy to say that as a city, we actually found that 99% of our contracts were actually given to Canadian companies. So we were already doing well, but I think, there's room to, to increase that still even further. So we're holding the line and we're going to push it even further, right? To make sure that we're supporting our Canadian businesses. The second thing that we did in response was we also passed a motion recently that calls for staff to not undertake any unnecessary travel to the United States, right? On behalf of the city. So we're going to continue doing that. But yeah, for sure. We also went through we're undergoing our budget process now as a city. So we're looking at things, like property taxes and expenditures. So we're also doing all of those, right? Mindful about the economic challenges that our residents face.
So with the rising costs of living, what small but meaningful actions can the city of Burnaby, the local government, can take to help the residents continue to thrive?
Yeah, so one of them is maybe in addition to, we're also working to keep things, like property taxes, low. It's going to be finalized in the next few months, but, that's something that I know was evident in our discussions, right? Maybe another really concrete thing that we did, and this was just last night. So I forwarded a motion to look at what we can do to help, for example, small scale food vendors do business in the city. So, especially with spring and summer coming up, I know we have a lot of small scale food vendors, that want to,
Yes.
Perhaps augment their income, or maybe they want to see if they can make a living, right, out of, selling food items, at pop-up markets or at festivals. And I've heard from some vendors that the fee that they have to pay to, to the city for their business licenses, it's been a barrier.
Okay.
So just the other
Yep.
night at City Council, we passed a motion directing staff to look at how we can make it easier for these small, oftentimes home-based businesses to thrive and be a part of also making our festivals, right? And our, pop-up markets and other events that might happen across the city even more vibrant. So I thought this was an important measure, especially because a lot of these food vendors are also from immigrant communities, right? And so I thought this, was something small that hopefully we could do as a city, to support them as they try to make ends meet, however way they can.
So are you going to lower the fee for them to join this festival, etc.?
Yeah. So we direct the staff to review our policy and also to look at what other jurisdictions are doing. And so my hope is that we're able to lower it, because vendors have been saying it's been a barrier, right? But, at the end of the day, we just want to make it easier for small businesses to thrive, especially small home-based ones or people that are just starting out. I know that I met some vendors who tell me that, they started out at festivals, and at small markets, right?
Yes.
So hopefully we're able to assist them.
That is great.
In getting those dreams of theirs going.
Yeah. Maita, you sound so knowledgeable, so passionate with your work as City Councillor of Burnaby. What drives you?
Yeah, I think, I have 2 kids, right? 2 teenagers. At the end of the day, I think they drive me, right? Wanting to, and I think that regardless of our political party, as elected officials, at the end of the day, we all want to just, make the world a better place for those that come after us, for our kids, right? So that's really what drives me.
Yeah.
I got
Great.
2 immigrant kids.
That is great.
They're brown. They don't look like, maybe, they don't look like Caucasian Canadians. So I want to see what I can do to make it easier for them.
Wow. Yeah.
And for kids like them and for everybody else.
You're doing great as a leader. And when I met you, I immediately asked you, are you Filipino? Hey, there's a Filipino councillor in Burnaby. And I'm so proud to have you as a city councillor of Burnaby. What advice would you give to young Filipino-Canadians who aspire to be in a leadership role?
Yeah, I think maybe 2 things. One is to be confident in, and this is hard, right? I realize this is hard. It took me decades, right, to get there. But to be really confident and proud of, wherever it is that you're from. As a Filipino person, absolutely, right? We need to be proud in our immigrants, be proud of our immigrant story. I know at City Council, for example, I mention it, when I can, because I found that it's relevant to the work that I do. So one is, be proud, who you are. If you need to learn more about the Philippines, do that.
Yeah.
If you need to learn more about Filipino history, because, we all didn't just, appear right here.
Yeah.
And I think as immigrants, especially for kids that are born here, and I know I experienced that, Charie, you feel a disconnect. It sort of feels like, oh, my family started in the 70s, right? Like my parents' story, my mom was a hairdresser, or maybe my dad was a custodian, and that's what they were. But then you don't realize that they have this whole backstory, right? And you have this whole, angkan relatives in the Philippines that are also part of your story. And then, so for example, I did all my schooling here, so I knew nothing about Filipino history. In my teens, I learned that I knew that the Philippines was colonized for 400 years by the Spanish. I knew that. But it was only in my teens, in a workshop, that I learned that over those 400 years, the Filipino people were fighting to be free, right? We're actually, people of fighters and revolutionaries. And that's when I started to learn, we're more than about pancit, right? Or more than tinikling, that there's this whole other side. So I'm aware, Charie, that they're organized to find an organization.
Yes.
If you need, as a young people, to learn more, find an organization, another group of young people who are organizing, to learn more about, this part of our history and the side of us. And then the other thing, he has advice, and I heard this from someone else on a panel that I was at UBC, and she said, follow your curiosity.
That's
right.
Yeah.
She said, we talk a lot about passion. Passion is good. Passions can be fickle sometimes, depending on where we are, but follow your curiosity. What are you curious about? And if you're young, wow, what an excellent time, right? To be doing that.
Yes.
And I think looking back, that's also what led me, right? Like I took political science because I was curious about it. I knew nothing about it. Then I was like, oh, why are people leaving the Philippines, right? I was curious about that. So I moved to the Philippines, right? And then, and like, what can we do to make Burnaby better? So I found that that's something that drove me. So yeah, so maybe it's a very long answer, I think. But 2 answers is learn
But
more
that's great. Yes.
about where you're from, be proud of that, and follow your curiosity, wherever that takes you.
2 years in your term and several more years as city councillor. What do you hope to achieve in your term, and what legacy do you hope to leave for future generations?
Yeah, thank you. I think that, at the end of the day, what I hope to achieve is I hope to be able to have provided an avenue for underrepresented communities and voices to be heard at City Council, and to have that reflected in the policies and programs that we create, so that at the end of the day, even more people feel like they're a part of this city and that they're included, they feel welcome, and that they feel seen. So that's the general vision, and also a challenge, right? And then, of course, I would like that to be the case for Burnaby and beyond, right? And especially for like the Filipino community, immigrant communities. Yeah, I hope that I'm always wondering, like, how can we reach out? How can we engage with more Filipinos, more immigrants? I know, sometimes we talk about, oh, let's empower this, let's empower that. I feel like these communities are already powerful. We just need to create the space and the avenue, right, for them to exert that power, so that they're heard, they're seen, they're listened to.
Yes, that's great. This conversation has been great, Maita. Thank you so much. And if there is one thing that you'd like to leave a message to our audience, what would it be?
Yeah, maybe that we all have an important story to tell. We all have an important story to tell. Tell it. Tell your story. And it's a powerful one. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Maita. And if they would want to reach out to you, where could they contact you?
Yeah, so they can contact me at, email maita.santiago@burnaby.ca. You can also visit our City of Burnaby website. We've got a phone number there as well, where, people can reach out and contact me. And I would love to hear from you. Reach out, speak up. I think in general, especially if you're from an immigrant community, Filipino youth, seniors, these underrepresented voices, for too long, others have spoken for us. Now it's really time, right, for you to speak for yourself, for us to speak for ourselves. So let's do that.
Thank you so much for your time and for sharing with us your story, Maita. Thank you so much for tuning in to Life Expressions. And I would just like to encourage you to create a positive impact wherever you are. Just like my ultimate purpose credo, let's make a positive impact in all the things that we do, however we can, just like what Councillor Maita Santiago does. Thank you so much for tuning in to Life Expressions. If you're not a subscriber yet, please hit that follow button so that you'll be notified each time we have a new episode here on Life Expressions. Till next time, I'm Charie Ginete-Ilon, and with my guest, Councillor Maita Santiago. Thank you so much, Councillor Maita Santiago.
Thank you.